Hello, everybody. Sitting in on this late in the day on Friday out brief on wargaming and education. I am James Pigeon Fielder, one of your moderators, and with Caitlin Leong, my co-moderator. Who I am doesn't matter. I'm just a old bird that teaches at Colorado State University with crazy hair, but I will give Caitlin a nice introduction. Caitlin is a master's candidate and Cyber Corps Scholarship for Service Fellow at Georgetown Security Studies Program. She currently serves as the president of the Georgetown University Wargaming Society and previously served as director of simulations for the George Washington University Strategic Crisis Simulations. She specializes in wargaming, emerging technologies, and cybersecurity policy. So today is an interesting panel in that we only had one paper submitted to the working group, and the gentleman who was going to join us to outbrief that may be coming from another meeting, so we'll give him a little bit of time to dial on. So in the meantime, I'm going to offer some remarks based on reading Tim Smith's paper and also participating in connections in other educational gaming or education and PME talks, and also my own experiences at CSU at the Air Force Academy, and some remarks about a paper that I'm working on, but I don't think consider it ready for submission. Certainly not ready for me to distribute. And it might end up being a War on the Rocks article versus a full-blown like academic peer-reviewed paper, if you will. Actually, before I continue, I want to see if Caitlin wants to offer any just opening remarks before we start.
Sure. Thanks, Pigeon. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in late on a Friday. We appreciate it. I'll let Pigeon start with his remarks first, but I'll offer a little bit of perspective related to my time with the Wargaming Society. Actually, some of you may have sat in on Lexi Brill's talks during Connections. She has taken over as president of the Wargaming Society at Georgetown for me since I just graduated in May, and talk a little bit about what we do there in terms of using wargaming to teach. And also what I used to do back when I was in my undergraduate studies at George Washington with the Strategic Crisis Simulations group there. So I'll kick it back over to Pigeon, and then we'll tag team from there.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you. So I'll be talking from two different perspectives. One from education in a military context, military community, and then education in a civilian context, assuming that folks here at Connections are not just involved with the Department of Defense, but also involved with like corporate gaming, perhaps organizational gaming, or maybe gaming with other departments, not just Department of Defense. So starting with perspectives from at least entry-level PME, let's say the Air Force Academy. So I had the opportunity to teach the U.S. Air Force Academy's Wargame Design course in the fall of 2018. It was rather new. I was only the second instructor for it. And I was surprised to find that USAFA, at least at the time, was the only academy that offered a undergraduate course in wargame design. I'd like to see that expanded out to other, not just the service academies, but also to like VMI, the Citadel, and so on. And you feel it's been a few years so that I've been out, so correct me if I'm wrong if there's other programs that are available. Anyway, so that point, I got right into the thick of it with my students, describing why games work psychologically, and then how to build a repertoire of mechanisms. So I told them, yes, this is a war game course. However, you're going to learn about gaming writ large, like how does dice probability work? How does card probability work? How does dominoes probability work? How do you look at other games besides just war games? You know, Dungeons and Dragons, Stuffed Fables, Castle Panic, The Grizzled, you name it. So you can build this repertoire of games that match the objective of your client. Now, of course, then for the educational portion of this, when it comes to games and education, it still goes back to the objective. In this case, it is what is the purpose of this game? What are my students trying to get out of it? If it's just a game to have fun in the classroom, then it's basically serves no purpose. You're just having fun, but you're wasting time. So, for example, teaching comparative authoritarianism at CSU last fall. I knew I wanted to test my students, their knowledge in how different authoritarian governments work compared to others. So the game was based on teams that had to function verbatim based on how this type of government works. So it built constraints into the game. You had to demonstrate you knew how this type of government worked in a zombie apocalypse, which was, then I built broader mechanics where it would measure, government responses or team responses to this type of crisis outbreak. Drawing on, let's say, like Pandemic, drawing on resource games such as Terraforming Mars, and so on and so on. And it went very well. From an educational perspective, from a civilian institution, what I had to worry about the most was, do my students understand why games work? And I found their minds a little bit more pliant, and saying, yeah, this is great. A couple would push back against it, but overall they thought it was great. And how quickly could I teach them how to play the game? Linking together both CSU and the USAFA. For example, my USAFA students, they had to do what I called game deconstruction. Like in learning how to play a game, you have to take it apart, go through the rule book, understand why it works, play it, but don't just play it to have fun, play it to critique it. And for example, they loved Terraforming Mars, and they played it after hours, but they said, unfortunately, though, it takes like an hour to unbox this thing. So how do you use this in an educational context? So for both designing at their academy and then teaching at CSU, I had to think of a game that could be taught very, very quickly. No, that game I played at CSU was manually based. So I had the pieces and parts that could come up on the stage and handle. Yes, it was projecting the screen, but it was very much a manual game. Where education shifts and is if I go to a software solution, let's say I had this crazy idea of using Minecraft in the classroom in the fall with one of my sections that's 150 students large. The more I think about it, though, I'm running into too many roadblocks. Do the students know how to play it? How much time am I willing to dedicate to teach students how to play Minecraft just to build a society inside the game? 2, can their computers actually run it? Should be able to, but it's not guaranteed. 3, civilian institution, do they actually have a computer? I had some students that use their phone for everything. Yeah, you can get Minecraft on the phone or whatnot. But there was just too many limitations. So I'm probably going to stick with a model that I perfected this past year. Well, perfected is probably kind of a strong word. Sharpened, I guess is a better way of saying it, where I just did a theater of the mind game using Discord, Zoom, and Google Docs. And that ran on everybody's system. So I knew that they could, track the message traffic in Discord. They could do audio only if necessary on Zoom. They could do visuals and whatnot. And then they could access the storage on Google Docs where everything just worked. So in a military context, so it's not necessarily about, do the students have, again, this is for a software solution, do they have the tool to access it? Do they have a laptop? All my students at the Air Force Academy were issued laptops. So that's a minimum barrier to entry. But can I put this game on the system then? So now from my educational perspective, a PME perspective, now I'm limited by network operations. So I imagine, all of the Air Force IT would be rolling in their graves, even though they're not actually dead, by saying, I want to install Minecraft in all my students' laptops. Air Force Academy actually might be a little more forgiving on that because they could install some personal software on it without too many draconian limitations. But let's say I wanted to teach SOS, Squadron Officer School, and I want to do a war game there. Then the IT might be a little more hesitant about me putting a commercial off-the-shelf game on student systems that wasn't approved by the network. So from that, I've identified in a military context, at worst, in my assessment, are bespoke games. The ones that you spend a lot of time to teach a student how to play in PMA context that they never use again. Versus in a civilian context, I know a professor who actually assigns Tabletop Simulator as one of the textbooks. So the students have to learn how to use Tabletop Simulator, but they get to keep it afterwards, and they can keep using it in other civilian contexts, even for just entertainment purposes. Next would be commercial off the shelf. Manually, it's a little more easy, so I can bring in Axis and Allies or Memoir 44 or something to a military education or PME context, and fairly easily deploy it. Civilian context, when I have 150 students, I don't know that I have the budget to buy that many copies of Memoir 44, if you will. Or again, if they get the software version of it, how long am I willing to get to learn how to play it? My final, what I prefer to do is have a system that is ideally built into the class or built into tools that the students are already using. So in a civilian construct, they all knew how to use Discord. They all knew how to use Zoom. They all know how to use Google Docs. So the barrier to entry was really low. The surface avoidance was pretty low. We could start playing right away. PME context, if I couldn't install software, I would maximize Teams. I would maximize email. I would maximize shared storage folders on the network. Something everyone knows how to use, or it should be very quick to teach. So then I would build a game in that can then be replicated easily across similar network constructs. I guess finally, and I'm working this up in my pigeon brain for an article. Would be I came up with this in a fit of caffeinated madness yesterday. Actually, was I call it the OSSS model, which is just, and this can apply mostly to network, but it can also apply to manual games as well. First, the O, what is the objective? The S, what is the surface? That is it manual or is it a computerized solution? And when it comes to surface, how easy is it for me to teach the students to use the surface so we can start getting educational value out of it? Then I guess you could say this is specific for IT. What system do you have and what software is it using? So can I install this program? Can the students use it? Do they have the network base to use it? And does the network allow it? And finally, is it simple? Pulling again off of James Dunnigan's classic words, keep it simple and plagiarize. So yes, it'd be great to buy a tabletop simulator version of Terraforming Mars, but we might not have the time to use it for just 1 or 2 class periods, like something that's more complex, maybe for an entire semester, but I don't often have time available for that. So from my perspective, education and wargaming, I want to expand at least that acronym, the OSSS, onto something a little more fleshed out for certainly for War on the Rocks, something like that. Anyway, so before I immediately put Tim on the spot, I'll see if Caitlin wants to go next, or if Tim is willing to press with the slides.
I'll defer to Tim if Tim's ready.
Okay.
Well, what do you have in mind? Because I really didn't prepare, because I thought when we didn't have our session yesterday that there was no continuation. So what would you like me to present? I can bring something up.
Right. So for people who are viewing this right now, I'm going to put this on tape. It's going to be on YouTube. I want to be internet famous for a bad way right now. I totally spaced. I took the connections. I put my name on the top. What panels am I on? Bam, 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 bam. Oh, educational outbrief is in Friday. Great. So we'll do the educational discussion. Totally not realizing there was a complete working group yesterday. And I had to just look myself in the mirror, admit I made a mistake, and say, well, we're not having that panel then. So I decided we'll press ahead with this outbrief as a roundtable for us to share our remarks and then to share your work, Tim. So if you just want to present your paper, you're welcome to do so. Well, in what form you feel comfortable with. You could be a truncated version, or it could be the full.
Well, the slides are very similar to the paper, essentially. The slides that I presented earlier. And I'm not sure how good my microphone is, but basically, I mean, we could simply talk to some of these issues since the slides have been presented. One of the things that I believe is very, very important and that institutions must come to understand is that there is, in fact, a need for infrastructure to enable effective simulation-based, laboratory-based instruction in general. We must think in a sort of we can't get captured by the quants excessively, but we must understand that there is a fourth credit hour in the courses that we do, and that is a lab. So we need a lab. One of the advantages that I have, and that Jim Lacey has at Marine Corps University, is the ability to do large, complex models. And since this is warfare training, education for military personnel, DoD analysts, university students in security studies, those who need to understand complex real-world phenomena, it's very important to have complex models that reflect the true complexity and the causal factors in the situations we have. Very hard to do that in an hour. And if you have to tear it down, the kind of challenge that, to a certain extent, that James Sterrett faces, command and staff, Phil Sabin wrote about in his book Simulating War when he was at King's College London, the need to have micro games misses the huge richness of complexity in the real world situations we are grooming people to be able to command. Over.
Pigeon, I think you might still be on mute.
That is the quote of the 21st century. Unmute yourself. Yes. So yes, fair enough, Tim. And actually, before I continue, I would like to offer a very quick introduction for Tim, if I may. Mr. Smith is a SIA in analytic methodology, multi-warfare analysis and modeling and simulations in the Farragut Technical Analysis Center, the TAC. Tim has worked in O&I since the mid-1980s, and he started in current intelligence before moving on to serve with naval aviators in O&I's Air Warfare Division, SPEAR, and their major career project, in-depth study in the history and theory of intelligence failure and surprise. And he's also serving as O&I's representative to national intelligence community level boards concerned with analytic modernization. And with that, I will now turn it over to Caitlin for her remarks.
Thanks, Pigeon. So a lot of what I have witnessed in terms of wargaming in the educational space is actually on the student side. While I was an undergraduate student, and then while I was a graduate student at Georgetown. And what I do in my day job now is essentially taking IT teams at companies and government agencies and teaching them about cybersecurity principles through tabletop exercises. So just to give you my perspective on wargaming and education, I think there's always, as Pigeon and Tim have mentioned, sort of this resource deficit of either time, of skilled folks to put the games together, or just having the right people in your corner to make sure that you can include games in whatever educational initiative you're pursuing. And so in particular, when I was an undergrad, our workaround for this, all of us that were interested in wargaming, was to start a student organization and work with a dedicated team of anywhere from 10 to 30 students to design full political military simulations 4 times a school year. And what we intended with these games was to teach any local area young professionals, undergraduates, graduate students who were in any way interested in international relations about how all of the different complexities of economics, military affairs, politics play into international crises and military affairs. And we set up for ourselves this goal of educating people. So the goal of the game was not, become an expert in this specific conflict or become an expert in this specific set of dynamics. It was, hey, what exactly does an intelligence analyst do? And how does the Office of the Director of National Intelligence work with the Department of Defense and the Secretary of State in a future Taiwan Straits crisis? And a lot of the feedback that we collected from these games, we used to have a Google form that took about 10 minutes to fill out. And we would ask all of our participants, how would you rate your learning? at the end of this. And frequently we said, okay, well, 90% of people are walking out saying they learned something. And about 85% of people are walking out saying they learned something useful. And there's a lot of value in that. Now, mind you, we were a student org operating on a shoestring budget of approximately, I think, $3,000 a year, which was just enough to cover pizza and room reservations. And it was only towards the end of my time at George Washington that the Elliott School of International Affairs actually really took an interest in what we were doing and linked our student organization to their Leadership Ethics and Practice initiative. So now there are a series of games that are run through the LEAP initiative at GW that came out of strategic crisis simulations that are designed by students. Now, as a student who stayed up burning a candle on both ends many hours to make these games run, what I will say is I think the problem in education is that if you want to push wargaming, you kind of have to be the one to do it. And you have to be the one willing to bear the time cost and the sacrifice of whatever else you could be doing with your time. And I think that means that people become a little bit wary of wargaming in general. A lot of professors that I've pitched to, hey, this would be a great class for you to include a wargame in. I'd be happy to link you up to people who could do it or who could kind of give you something in a box that would fit really well. The response that I've gotten 9 times out of 10 has been, oh, that sounds like a lot of time and effort. And I don't know that, I could run this game, or I don't know that my TA could run this game. And I think that's fair, which goes back to the point that I think we've all made about having something that works with the amount of time that you're given and meets the educational objective just ready to go is oftentimes the best way to include wargaming in an educational program. Now, that said, I do think that if we as a wargaming community put a little bit more emphasis on bringing people up with war games in education, really pushing it, giving outside opportunities, something that I've been really proud of with the Wargaming Society and the work that we do at Georgetown is just having game nights. Hey, you're interested in this era of military history, we're running a game night, come play this game, learn about the dynamics, learn about how combat resolution tables model the historical conflict and kind of go from there. So I think the summary of my experience has been there's a lot of different entry points and ways that you can get involved in wargaming and ways that wargaming can be used in education. But it seems that to date, at least, a lot of it is very ad hoc, based on personalities, based on people being willing. And I think that we would benefit as a whole, both the existing wargaming community and the community of the future, if we moved towards a model where it wasn't just ad hoc and we could get people on board a little bit faster. Now, I'm not pretending to have all the answers about how we get around the time constraint or the resource constraint, but I do think it's something to think about is, if you are interested in including war games in an educational initiative, how do you pitch it? And how do you identify the right people and resources to be involved so that once you do pitch it and your pitch is successful, that the actual execution of the game is successful. So I'll leave it at that and I'll kick it back over to Pigeon.
Actually, Caitlin remind me of 2 very, very important points. First, based on what she just immediately said, and pun on my nickname intended, it dovetails with the previous working group that was called Educating Wargamers, i.e. how do you create this cadre of people who actually don't just know how to play, but they know how to design and execute a game. So moving forward, it takes kind of like, it's a combination of evangelizing the value of games in the classroom, but also teaching people how to do it. That's something I've done at CSU. I've given 3 classes so far to faculty on how, first, why games work, and B, techniques they can use very simply to build very quick educational exercises in their classrooms. But one question that's always asked, and Caitlin, when she was talking about the Google form they filled out, well, how do I know if it worked? Like, how do you assess it? How do you measure it? Since my larger games have been more theater of the mind versus, I guess, more qualitative versus quantitative, how I do it is a written debrief. I do still have an oral debrief at the very end of the game. Usually in the last day of the game, I save 10 minutes for short remarks. That's more for the catharsis, letting the students kind of decompress. That's what a game theorist, Daniel McKay, would have called memorializing the event, just to kind of get off the chest and get initial feedback. But the meat of it is the written debrief. So they have to submit a after action report. That's gradable. It's fairly. I almost tell my students this might be the easiest A you've ever made, but I read it with a fine tooth comb, making sure that you're actually sharing. No kidding. This is what I learned, and this is how it impacted me. Why I made certain decisions, why I didn't follow different courses of action, and also for me, what feedback they have for future iterations of this game. Now, how do I tie that though to how does it influence them for the rest of the course? Like, does playing this game actually change how they work with the material later? That'll be worthy of another study. I have seen evidence in political science literature, particularly reading publications in a journal of political science education about individuals saying, or professors saying, yes, I do have data that support students did learn more after this compared to other classes of the same type that didn't have an exercise. It also made more problematic for me that I typically do a capstone exercise versus playing it throughout. And it takes place fairly late in the course, so I don't necessarily have the time built in to see how it affects them later. I will say that I did have one when I ran earlier games at the Air Force Academy in geopolitics courses, that qualitatively and anecdotally students would come up to me and say, whoa, I'm thinking about the material different now. Like before it was all theory, now I've seen it actually taking place. The arguments, the coming close to fisticuffs, the successes, the winning, the win state, it made the material feel more real. So I want to build on that. Let's see. So we have, from that, I'm going to look at the questions and comments from Discord. First, Tracy did ask, anyone know an expansion set for Terraforming Mars that gets it past 5 flares? Off the top of my head, I have all the expansions. I don't recall that any of them do, unfortunately. So almost got to kind of homebrew more players, if you will. I'll have to double check the digital version, though, too. Tracy also adds, let's see, based on personalities, signature editions of box games may be an indicator. And I want to expand on that. The idea that when Caitlin says we want to train gamers, but in a way, I'm trying to remember who said this. If it was Phil Sabin or Peter Perla that said, you can train like 1,000 people how to build the game. And maybe those 1,000 people will know how to design the game, but maybe only 10 of them will then know how to have that kind of combination of a chutzpah and patience and personality to run a game in the classroom, like to be the facilitator, if you will. So I would say that whatever program you're using to teach gamers can't just be about the design and the development, but also the personality aspects of running the game. And I'll now turn over, see if Tim wants to add, or Caitlin wants to add to that.
Sure, Pigeon, thanks. Yeah, I definitely agree. One of the takeaways I always have in every institution at this point in our disciplinary maturation is that we haven't hit the takeoff point yet. We're still a third world discipline. And what we need is really to establish that kind of credibility. And the best way to do it is just the way that all of us have been doing it. Getting what little bit of a lily pad we can on our pond and trying to grow a little corner of excellence where some credibility through demonstration can be presented for consideration by the chain of command. So I think philosophically that if you look at the historical maturation process in disciplines, the professionalization process, we might be at a takeoff point now where there's building enough credibility where you start to get multiplier effects. And I think we're seeing that by the expanding of the base of acceptance of wargaming and some of the research that's been doing trying to develop metrics for learning value and do the studies required. So if we really need to have an educational model with 2 professors per class. That is one, the classroom lecturer, the theoretician, the one who reads the papers, and the other professor who runs the lab. And that lab needs to be a full-time activity for in-depth studies. And I would say ideally both quiz type studies, that is in-class work, that is in the lab that you report on every couple of weeks over the course of a semester. But your final exam should be a war game if you're a designer, or if you're in a history class or any other military disciplinary class, where you analyze the causal model, demonstrate your knowledge of military cause and effect, you devise a course of action, demonstrating your knowledge of the military decision-making process, you execute it and you report on it, and that's your final exam, and that should be a final project. That should be a big chunk of grades. So we need to institutionalize a real change, a movement toward more of a STEM model. Of course, it might be a theater arts too, because you have to do dancing to prove choreography. You have to read sheet music, but you have to perform. So it's not just STEM, but the dual professor practice and theory and practice, combination of theory and praxis, is what we really need to develop. But we need to institutionalize the institutional setting and the professorial resources for that kind of capability.
Well said, Tim. Very well said. I concur. And then if Caitlin has anything.
No, I agree totally with what Tim said, but I think we're a little bit over time. So thanks to everyone who tuned in to watch us and listen in. Very much appreciate your time on this Friday afternoon, and hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Sweet. So barring any future, I see Tracy's typing something right quick. I thought this ran for an hour, but
oh, does it?
I think so.
I thought we were in a half an hour time slot. We'll have to trim this at the end. Us saying, "Oh, how long were we here for?"
Yeah. After this is once this closes, I'm gonna post in the Discord comments some journals I recommend if viewers want both print and play games that have a political aspect to them, but I'd say are still useful, easy to modify for other courses. And also, like if you want like academic support for why games work in the classroom, these journals will have best practice articles saying, here's what I did, and here's why it worked, and here's the data I have to support it. Yeah. Nice. Yeah, Trace says humanities or history. Add it to make STEM STEM. You put politics in, it could be STEMP, and it sounds like a Three Stooges character at the end.
Or a former president.
Oh, a program for 30 minutes. Okay, well, I guess we exceeded the standard then in a way. So yes, barring other questions, I concur with Caitlin that will say, hey, we'll wrap it here, and thanks for coming out. And this is a good end of the conference, I think. Go have your end of conference beer, which apparently Don has already started on, or your coffee, and I'll drink your beer if you don't drink.
Thanks, guys. Very, very nice of you to let me join you. Pigeon and Caitlin, I'd like to talk to you further about these kinds of ideas. You know, just to take 10 seconds here, there's a large series of card-driven games produced by GMT on major political military events through history. And Mark Herman, a great designer of card-driven games, has been coming out with a lot of them lately. They're not military games. They are strategic national security decision-making level games, really ideal university level security studies, peace studies, diplomacy, foreign affairs that could really be credible in the established discipline of international relations and political science. And one of the comments I made in another forum is that if you look at simulation-based lab for your poli-sci international relations course, it's kind of like the difference between, if you compare Wargaming, human in the loop, to modeling and simulation with its statistical computational Monte Carlo modeling, so on and so forth, it's very much aligned with the debate in poli-sci methods literature between case studies, comparative analysis, and thick description on the one hand, and the quants on the other hand, who just want to do their surveys and do the large data sets. So I think there's a real role to fit in with an ongoing debate that's in the university. We're not shoving something into a university. There's a round hole for a round peg, I really believe. So I'd like to follow up with you guys over the course of the summer about some ideas in that regard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Dig it.
Yeah, of course.
Super. Thank you so much. Great to see you guys again. We'll talk again soon.
Sweet. Sounds good.
Smith,
Thank you.